This is the Taurus Demon. For most people who have played Dark Souls, he'll be the second boss you ever fought. But he's not what I'm interested in today. What I'm interested in is the floor. Or rather, I'm interested in the Taurus Demon's boss arena. See, if there's one word I'd use to describe Dark Souls, it'd be versatile. Versatility in game design is a less intuitive concept than it sounds, but effectively, versatility in this context means that the game offers a significant variety of solutions to any problems the player faces, and that making a decision about which solution to implement will significantly alter the experience of play. If you have 5 weapons that all do the same damage and have the same moveset, then you have variety, but you lack dynamics. If you have one weapon that can be used in several different contexts, then you have dynamics but lack variety. You need both variety and dynamics to have a design that I would call versatile. Dark Souls is an incredible game in prioritizing versatility, such that when you play the game, you always have options to get around any new problem. Typically, Dark Souls accomplishes this by having every aspect of the game involve some amount of trade-off between benefits and drawbacks. It's such that when something seems like an obvious benefit, there's usually some non-obvious detriment that is directly connected to it, and vice versa. Crystal weapons have high damage output, but break easily. Being cursed cuts your health in half, but allows you to fight the ghosts in New Lana Ruins. Even dying can save you a trip back to a bonfire if you're okay with losing some souls. And almost no problem in the game has strictly one solution, which means that when faced with multiple solutions that each have a benefit and drawback, players will have to make creative decisions about how to approach a situation based on what benefits and drawbacks they would rather receive in order to succeed. This tug and pull design is true through so much of the game that in rare instances where it doesn't pan out as effectively, these sections of the game are notorious for being the worst parts. The Bed of Chaos, for example, is designed in such a way that there is only really one non-cheese solution to the boss, which means that no matter what approach you've taken through the game so far, you won't have developed a unique set of skills that will benefit you during that boss fight. The Bed of Chaos is an example of non-versatility because it lacks variety. It's just a platforming challenge. And then another of the most hated bosses, the Taurus Demon, is an example of non-versatility because it lacks dynamics. You have different options for how to construct a build for the Taurus Demon, but there's only one build approach that feels obviously optimal, and that's to make a build that can tank hits. Like yes, if you play the game with the intention of using light armor and fast rolling, you can beat the Taurus Demon. But because it's way easier and more efficient to just swap out with heavy armor and a strong shield and just tank the first few hits in the dogs, the Taurus Demon doesn't reward a variety of approaches so much as it rewards generally one approach. Variety is still there, but the dynamics don't favor actually getting the most out of the variety on offer. The Taurus Demon is, to me, the gold standard of how Dark Souls constructs scenarios that reward both variety and dynamics of play. The Taurus Demon's boss arena is special, because it best embodies how the tug and pull nature and the versatile design of Dark Souls works. So let's look at the arena and the fight in more detail. There are a few basic elements to the arena. There's the bridge, the ladder, and a platform which can be accessed via said ladder. The bridge has 2 openings where both you and the Taurus Demon can fall off. The platform has 1 opening like this. The bridge is slightly curved and pretty tight from side to side, while being fairly long from end to end. The platform is circular and allows for a lot more freedom of movement, but requires being able to make it onto the platform from the ladder without being attacked. If the player doesn't kill them beforehand, there are also 2 archers on top of the platform that present an additional issue. The platform can be used for a plunging attack on the Taurus Demon, which will do a significant amount of damage but render the platform unsafe unless the player can trick the Taurus Demon into giving you an opening to get back onto the platform. There's a few approaches the player can take towards their environment to fight the Taurus Demon. Juke the demon off the bridge or platform, use the plunging attack to deal high damage, kill the demon on the bridge, or kill the demon on the platform. I suspect most players who have killed the Taurus Demon haven't done all of these different approaches, because the arena is designed with versatility in mind, meaning that because all of these are viable approaches, people will naturally gravitate towards the approach that best suits their particular way of playing the game. I typically fight the Taurus Demon on the bridge or else use the plunging attack. This is because I'm a generally impatient player who wants to get everything over with quicker, so anything that adds to the time it takes to beat the boss is something I'm less likely to try. So the platform wasn't a place that occurred to me as a valid location for fighting the Taurus Demon until recently. But after fighting him on the platform, it became apparent to me that it's a much lower risk option from a playstyle, which emphasizes light armor and dodge rolling. I still prefer the bridge because I'm not really much of a low risk player in the first place, but if I want to play in a lower risk way, I have an option that is directly validated by the arena's design. And this is my point. The Taurus Demon fight and accompanying boss arena is designed to test players on how they approach solutions differently depending on their different skills and approaches to the game. Each way of playing the game has an optimal version of the Taurus Demon that, although maybe not preferred by every player who plays in such a way, will still make sense from a game theory perspective. To demonstrate this, I fought the Taurus Demon with 4 different starter classes: the Knight, the Thief, the Pyromancer, and the Sorcerer. The Knight uses heavy armor and a stronger weapon, the Thief uses light armor and a weaker weapon, and then the Pyromancer and Sorcerer both use weaker armor and combine somewhat weak weapons with projectile attack options. If you're using heavy armor and a stronger weapon, the bridge's claustrophobic walls won't bother you too much because you're less likely to use dodging in favor of shielding and tanking hits. This means that, although you'll be safer on the platform instead of the bridge, the risk of running to the ladder and climbing the ladder while having generally slower movement means that you're likely going to end up seeing a bridge fight as the optimal strategy for the Knight. If you're using weak armor and a weaker weapon, then the bridge's claustrophobic walls will make dodge rolling effectively a bit more difficult, which means that the platform might be better suited for you, and given that you can easily make it to the platform without getting hit by the Taurus Demon in the process, this approach or even the cheese method of repeated plunging attacks might be the optimal strategy for the Thief. If you're using projectiles, then the bridge provides you a lot more space to back away from the Taurus Demon and fire off shots, meaning that the more optimal strategy will be to keep firing and backing away until you feel it necessary to dodge past the Taurus Demon and hit him from the other direction, backing away towards the other end of the bridge. Simply put, your build and playstyle will change your relationship to the arena, and this is because of how the arena is designed. It was designed to validate different builds and playstyles in unique ways, but no one way of approaching the Taurus Demon is so optimal that it'll invalidate alternative approaches or render them pointless or excessive. The Taurus Demon fight, despite being one of the less exciting fights in the game, is a fight that demonstrates the game's versatility better than just about any other. There's still an additional layer to the Taurus Demon fight that's worth mentioning. The Taurus Demon fight is a fully optional boss. While most players will fight the Taurus Demon at some point, he isn't a necessary fight for accessing the Bells of Awakening or for accessing the Lower Berg, which means you don't need to fight him to beat the game, and you don't need to fight him to max out your weapons or armor on the default Ascension path. See, in games, there's high-level gameplay and low-level gameplay. The boss arena is an example of low-level gameplay, the basics of what a player does from moment to moment. But bigger, overarching decisions that the player has to make that will impact the rest of the game are also worth noting from a design standpoint, and the Taurus Demon has a degree of versatility in that aspect too. The Taurus Demon, despite being the so-called second boss of Dark Souls, is only a mandatory boss to an inexperienced player. After recognizing that you can access the Undead Parish in the Lower Berg without fighting the Taurus Demon, you can develop a route through the game that means that you either never encounter the Taurus Demon at all, or encounter him at whatever time you want to. This means that the Taurus Demon is a boss that you can decide not just how to approach from the fight itself, but what use you can get out of fighting him at various intervals. He's a great second boss because at that point you'll be a lower level, and the small amount of souls that he drops will be a more substantial reward. But he can also make a great late game boss for players who want to fight all the bosses but don't particularly enjoy that fight. A true optimal way to fight the Taurus Demon is to fight him after you've maxed out a late game build and then just clobber him instantly. But this requires having the skill to get to the late game in the first place, and an additional skill to get to the late game without having gone through him first. This is the trade-off, where the benefit is giving to have an easy, lopsided fight against the boss who, at one point, was genuinely intimidating to first-timers. Doing something significantly more difficult in order to make one boss fight easier isn't the most intuitive approach, but it is, again, an approach validated by the game in a unique way from the traditional Taurus Demon approach. This is the key to how Dark Souls versatility works. Your approach shapes your experience, and it does so in terms of both low-level play and high-level play. No approach is so good that it renders alternative approaches redundant. It's a game that rewards experimentation, thinking outside the box, learning your surroundings, and developing a nearly dance-like relationship with enemies. The Taurus Demon's boss arena is a successful example of environmental design that goes against an established tradition for boss arenas. The challenge is supposed to be your foe, not the ground you walk on. There are plenty of bosses across all of gaming that break this general trend, but these bosses tend to be more divisive than those that treat the environment as a less relevant detail to the challenge of the boss itself. The consequence of this is that we can easily end up in a situation where we get a series of dull, circular arenas where players are expected to just strafe around one big enemy, waiting to get hits on them when the window opens. This isn't always a bad thing, but it has a more serious long-term effect on players that I think is worth mentioning. By having bosses often be set in these really generic, arena-like spaces, it creates an issue within the structure of a game's ludonarrative. When you arrive in the arena, it's clear at that moment that you are about to enter into a boss fight, because you're familiar with the trope of the big open arena from other games. It lacks surprise, but it also feels like a sort of endpoint to a journey, where the final destination is the boss fight itself, which leads to this sense that the boss is the climax not just of combat, but of the environment. Designers likely want this effect because they want the boss to feel like what everything has been building up to. But not every boss should feel this way, and depending on what story you want to tell through plot or gameplay, you might very well want to avoid this approach for some or even all bosses in a game. The traditional boss arena inadvertently causes this feeling of fakeness, like you've left a world and entered a stage, like you're about to perform a dance in the round, rather than actually finding yourself in a tough spot. This was fine in the era of Doom when graphics and gameplay didn't generally favor a sense of immersion, but when you want to get lost in the world and story of a game, things that serve as obvious reminders that what you're doing is playing a game can sometimes be a serious detriment to the experience. The Taurus Demon is a set piece as much as it is a boss battle, and both of these can be important elements of how a game tells its story or immerses you in its world. Games which seek out the familiar tend to be easy to forget, and while some of the best bosses are impossible to forget, the environments that the fights take place in are far less commonly remembered or even talked about. And that's a shame, because if there's anything that the Taurus Demon fight demonstrates, it's that the environment really is half the battle. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to check out my recent videos in my ongoing A Brief Moment of Meaning series, where I discuss how small details of a game help communicate the broader themes of microcosm. This video was originally going to be part of that series, but Dark Souls is a really complex game and I have a different video in mind for it, so be on the lookout for that soon. I also have long-form video essays on Half-Life 2 and Shadow of the Colossus that I recommend. I intend to eventually make a long-form video essay on the original Dark Souls that goes in-depth on all of the storylines and engages with the gameplay and story through the lens of philosophical themes. In particular, how the game presents a series of ethical dilemmas that call into question different forms of existentialist outlooks on life. The long-form Dark Souls video is going to be a very involved and lengthy project, and I won't be able to tackle it without continued support from my patrons at Patreon. If you'd like to support this channel and help see these bigger projects get made, as well as get sections of longer-form video essays early, then consider joining my Patreon. Any support is greatly appreciated. Thank you, and stay tuned.